Hello, I'm Kayla Mills. This is Stephen Marquette, Ethan Hine, Daniel Mader, and our research topic was activism in sports. Athletes from all leagues have opinions on issues in society and have the ability to use our platform to raise awareness to these topics. Leonard Fournette, who is the current running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars, posted a picture on his Twitter account of him wearing a shirt of the late Alton Sterling, who was a victim of police gun violence. Fournette, who was aware that he has a large fan base and can bring awareness to this topic, continued to protest even if he received backlash for this. Athletes have done this throughout history and have kept using their platform to fight for issues they feel need to be heard and resolved. The question we base our research off of is the collision of sports and politics good for professional sports? This has led us to our team thesis, which is athletes using their platforms to voice opinions is positive for sports leagues because it brings attention to the leagues and political issues.
Hello, I'm Steven, and I'll be speaking from the ethical lens. So, the ethics behind athletes protesting has had controversy in recent history. It can be frustrating to pro-Colin Kaepernick fans that a non-violent protest such as kneeling before games during the national anthem has left him excluded from the NFL, while there have been players such as Adrian Peterson who have had domestic violence cases that have just led to fines and suspensions. Outside of Colin Kaepernick, there have been several other protests that have had positive effects on the players or their leagues. This leads me to my first claim that athletes have the ability to benefit their leagues by bringing awareness to issues using their platform. During the annual Excellence in Sport Julia Awards in 2016, NBA superstars LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Paul opened up the ceremony with a speech on police gun violence and racism in America. During the speech, Dwayne Wade said, "The shoot-to-kill mentality has to stop. The racial profiling has to stop. Enough is enough." With 5.6 million people tuning into the ABC channel that night, according to Sports Media Watch, these players knew they'd be able to use their large platforms to speak out to on this issue to a large audience at once. When athletes like these bring recognition of political issues, it can gain popularity and attention to the leagues. Athletes also have the ability to benefit themselves through protesting and activism. Author John Matthew Smith wrote a journal article on Lou Alcindor, otherwise known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Alcindor, who led the team of UCLA to an undefeated season and national championship in 1968, was invited to join the Olympic team in Mexico City that year, but declined in a protest towards racism in America. Smith writes, instead of practicing with the U.S. Olympic team, Alcindor spent his summer in his hometown, New York City, teaching urban youth the importance of education at basketball clinics. Alcindor went on to be the first pick in the NBA draft that year, and to this day has the most points scored in NBA history. This leads me to my team thesis that athletes have the right to use their significant influence in society to attempt to benefit themselves or their leagues.
I will be speaking from the historical lens of our research topic. During an interview on ESPN in June of 2018, LeBron James criticized Trump. After receiving backlash, he continued to protest by using his platform to raise awareness to this topic. Like LeBron James, Billie Jean King was able to do this for gender equality in sports. In Susan Ware's book, Game, Set, Match, Billie Jean King on the Revolution of Women's Sports, she explained how Billie Jean King intertwined feminism in sports by advocating for equal pay. This started with the Bobby Riggs match that he claimed he was going to beat her in, but she won. This set the tone for gender equality in sports. Like Billie Jean King, Tommy Smith and John Carlos were able to advocate for racial equality in sports. These two men were in the 1968 Olympic Games, and when the national anthem was played, they lowered their heads and raised their fists in a Black Power salute. After receiving consequences such as being disqualified from the Games, being sent home, fired from their jobs, and they even received death threats, they still protested for this and advocated by using their platform. Historical athletes have had a harder time advocating for their beliefs than athletes in modern day. This has led me to my thesis, which is modern athletes expressing their opinions have had a more positive effect today than did in the 20th century.
I'm Ethan. I'll be talking from the economic lens. I looked at how athletes throughout history have been affected economically by voicing their opinions publicly, as well as how those public opinions have affected television ratings. A lot of people are aware of the 1968 Olympics and the use of the medal ceremony by Tommy Smith and John Carlos to publicly protest. But what a lot of people aren't aware of is the third person on the podium, Peter Norman. He simply wore an Olympic Project for Human Rights badge. He was then taken back to his home country of Australia, and according to Aaron Blake Moore, who writes about history, science, and culture for outlets such as National Public Radio, National Geographic, and The Atlantic, states that although Norman qualified for the Olympics over and over again, posting the fastest times in all of Australia, he was snubbed from the Olympic team. Because he was no longer able to do what he did best, he was forced to retire from the sport and started suffering from severe alcoholism, painkiller addiction, and depression. The television ratings, it was not just that was affected. It was also the television ratings were the ones that were affected. According to Darren Ravel, who is a senior writer for ESPN, in 2017, 1.6 million less people tuned into an NFL game compared to 2016. This is the effect of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem that spread to the rest of the NFL. The ratings themselves were down 9.7%, according to multiple sources such as ESPN, ABC, and Nielsen television ratings. The NFL did not see this as a problem, as they actually made more money in 2017 compared to 2016. However, the issue was that the television networks were the ones that lost money, and if those television networks continue to lose money, they will eventually have to stop partnering with the NFL, eventually causing the NFL to lose significant amounts of money. This leads me to my thesis, which is athletes using their platform affects ratings and revenue generated for themselves in their respective sport.
Alright, so I'm Daniel, and I looked at this topic from the social and cultural lens, and I looked at the modern NBA and the NFL when it comes to politics. Jerry Bembry of The Undefeated, a sports page, calls 2017 the year of athletes and activism when it comes to sports. And the NBA and the NFL have been at the center of this talk. So my first claim, NBA players feel like their teams are understanding of their beliefs, while NFL players feel silenced. So Ian Thomas, who's a former NBA player and the author of the book We Matter, Athletes and Activism, spoke on this topic with John Solomon of the Aspen Institute. And he says that NFL players fear that teams kind of just want players to shut up and play. So fear of fines and backlash stops many NFL players from expressing themselves, but NBA players feel silenced because they know they feel comfortable because they know they have their team support. And Be Like Mike, The Black Athlete's Dilemma by Joshua Wright, he discusses NBA legend Michael Jordan's lack of social influence in his career. He says that for many Americans, Jordan's success is enough for him to be viewed as a role model, but for others, his failure to use his lofty platform to be a social trailblazer as a mark on his legacy. NBA players in Jordan's era would see someone like Craig Hodges, who was left unsigned after being involved in social activism, the same as how NFL players would see Colin Kaepernick today. Seeing the consequences caused the silence from other NFL players. And then my second claim, the NBA is a player-driven league, while the NFL is a team-driven league. So having more attention, players have more room to express themselves to media. Danielle Coombs and Dave Casillo, who are a professor and research assistant at Kent State University, did a study on LeBron James and his involvement with the Black Lives Matter movement, and they conclude that he's able to moderate a message of consideration rather than revolution. And James is able to do this because of his platform through media and the attention his league gives him. So this all led me to my thesis that the NBA's accepting culture towards politics and activism rather than the NFL's more strict culture shows that sports and politics can mix without issues.
So our counterclaim was that at times activism in sports can have backlash or harm on an athlete's profile as a professional athlete. Colin Kaepernick is the most recent and prominent example of this. Professor and law and sports business expert Mark Edelman says that Kaepernick hoped that his protest would bring attention to police officers' disproportionate shooting of black people in the United States, but he angered certain segments of the U.S. military and police communities. His risk has left him unsigned by all NFL teams.
Kaepernick did not receive 1/3 of his $126 million contract, according to Business Insider expert Court Gaines.
However, Kaepernick, who recently just signed a deal to be the face of Nike, tweeted out in September saying, "Believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything." Even though this protest is one that needed to be done, it has had serious effects on his profile as a professional athlete.
So for our team solution, instead of leagues like the NFL fining players often like they have been, we looked at each lens and possible solutions to help sports leagues accept players' social activism. And by looking at this, we decided that by looking at the history of athletes' activism in the current NBA, the sports world should push to accept politics being involved in sports and let players' voices be heard. To do this, they would have to establish rules and players are comfortable with and build trust with their players and allow players to give players other options to express themselves. The implications of this, it would help leagues like the NFL solve their issues with politics and their players, and players' voices would be heard. However, the limitations of this is it would take a fair amount of time for players to build trust with their leagues and to establish rules that players agree with.
Okay. Kayla, we'll start with you. In the future, what changes would you make to your group's norms, and how would you expect that to improve the team's presentation?
To change some norms up, I think we could we have, like, throughout all the things that we've done so far this year, we've mostly kept the same lens throughout every research topic that we've done, and I think maybe switching up the lens that we have as a team group would benefit us by looking at different perspectives from the topic.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, reflecting on your teammates' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
I would say Ethan with the economic lens really helped me out because I looked at Kaepernick a lot throughout my research, and I didn't want to overlap with this, but like looking at how much money Kaepernick lost by protesting, like kind of like helped me write my counterclaim as well as my second claim.
Okay. Ethan, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
Well, if you look at what Daniel said earlier, is that allowing like Roger Goodell of the NFL to apply the same as Adam Silver of the NBA to allow athletes to like express their opinions and protest affected like how I looked at my topic because of economics and how like athletes have lost their jobs and lost money. So to see that they should also like understand that the athletes are being like affected, and that Adam Silver is the one that actually like seems to be understanding this at this point, because athletes like throughout history have just been losing a lot of money. And
Okay. All right, and finally, Daniel, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude?
I think how Kayla was talking about how athletes throughout history have done the same as athletes today. I feel like there's parts of that we had like different parts of history we had to leave out because you can't fit it all into the presentation. So we're talking about Billie Jean King and gender equality. We could also talk about the racial equality, but there's also parts of that we couldn't include that she was in her paper. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, folks.